poverty, grow inequality, grow the number of people living in their cars, and this formula includes cut benefit increases, keep benefit levels below the poverty line, then increase unemployment, followed by increasing benefit sanctions, and just watch as more people experience material hardship, food insecurity, and as UNICEF reports that Aotearoa continues to be one of the worst countries for children's well-being in the developed world. The minister should be ashamed to even refer to this bill as supporting people into employment because there's nothing in this bill that does this. Absolutely nothing. She either did not read the bill or is just choosing to omit the bits of this bill, the majority of this bill, that will simply push people further into poverty. The so-called non-financial sanctions, and that is, I think, an inaccurate description of what they do, will push people further into poverty. I think calling them non-financial sanctions is simply incorrect, because let's outline the benefit sanctions that are in this bill and what they do. Compulsory money management, which will put 50% of someone's income in a payment card that then they won't be able to use to pay their rent, to pay their bills, or for other basic essentials. When we know that most people on the benefit are already paying 50% of their income on rent, we know that this benefit sanction, deemed non-financial, will literally leave people unable to keep a roof over their head. There's a financial impact in here. Then let's look at community work experience. Most organizations who were consulted reported that they were not so keen to participate in this because it actually destroys the purpose of volunteering and it burdens those volunteer organizations. That benefit sanction will do nothing to adequately support people to engage and to be part of their communities. And what's worse, people subjected to the sanction as well as others will be unable to access things like hardship grants. For those who don't know, people on the benefit, many of them rely on hardship grants on a sometimes regular basis, sometimes even weekly basis, just to survive. How can we call these sanctions non-financial when they strip away people's ability to access the very assistance that allows them to sometimes have food on the table? Then we also have two benefit sanctions that were added later in the piece. Terrible lawmaking process, because the minister outlined in the cabinet paper that she intended to do this and didn't let anyone in the public know until later in the select committee stage, stripping away people's ability to submit on these two other so-called non-financial sanctions. If the minister was so confident about the process that she was following and her policies, she would have let people know of her intentions so that these sanctions could be adequately scrutinized. Let's talk about the so-called job search report, which will then force people to look for apply for 3 jobs each week, but then those people won't even be able to access the assistance that then allows them to enter into employment. So for example, financial assistance that allows them to have access to uniforms, that have access to transport, that have access to, for example, a vehicle that allows them to get into that very same job. Literally what the government is doing is making it harder to get into employment. And no matter how much evidence we present to the minister over how benefit sanctions do not work, they simply push people further into poverty. The minister seems to not care. But I actually think that it's beyond the minister not caring. The minister always intended to increase poverty in this country. Because I cannot see anything in this legislation that does otherwise. And we've already seen the impacts of government policies, for example, the stripping away of subsidies that allows people to access basic essentials such as prescriptions, such as public transport, and that number growing, the number of children who don't have their bare essentials like food at the table to just be well. Mr. Speaker, it's really clear to me that there's nothing in this bill that will support children to thrive and parents to find employment. And it's also clear to all of us, it doesn't take anyone doing an economics paper to know this, that there are not enough jobs out there for every unemployed person on the benefit. Those are facts. This means that the government not just relied on increasing unemployment, they haven't created enough jobs to actually ensure that everyone who's unemployed has an opportunity to get into work. They gutted benefit increases only to then increase financial sanctions. But I want to also believe that a different future is absolutely within our grasp. Because under the last national government, I was privileged enough to actually take part in a campaign to get rid of the benefit sanction affecting solo parents. At the time, around 2017, there were 17,000 solo moms who were affected by the sanction for simply not naming the other parent of their child, being stripped away of income support. The National Party then did not care. They did not care about the fact that solo parents were being pushed deeper into poverty as a result of this benefit sanction that had no evidence of working. They constantly opposed repealing it, but we changed the government and we got rid of the sanction. And if it was up to the Greens, we would not only get rid of the sanctions imposed on this piece of legislation, but all benefit sanctions, because it's actually the government's responsibility to show us and demonstrate that their policies are working as intended. So far, they haven't. They've gone off vibes, they've gone off cruelty, lack of empathy, but we should not expect anything else from a prime minister that called people on the benefit during the campaign trail bottom trawlers. Because this is the kind of attitude that the government members take when it comes to the people living in poverty, using names, conjuring beneficiaries who they've never met, to simply try to make ideological points and punch on those that are literally sometimes sleeping in their cars, often many of them receiving income support, working to make ends meet. And what's worse is that in this piece of legislation, the government also narrowed the definition of what we call work gap, which is the definition that allows people to then apply for a benefit. By narrowing who is considered to have a work gap, effectively what the government is doing is limiting who can access income support. And this is to get them on track for their target of 50,000 less people on the benefit. That is not about getting those 50,000 people into work. It's simply to strip 50,000 people of income support. The government has admitted that they don't care where those people go when they are not on the benefit. They simply want to get 50,000 people of income support. For what? To pay for tax cuts for landlords. That's basically their motive. They're taking away resources from the poorest people in our country to give money to the landlords. And it shows that this government is reheating their nachos by bringing back policies from the 80s that having massively increased unemployment and inequality simply to give bucks to the wealthy few. Mr. Speaker, I want us to commit to ensuring, and I commit everyone on the side of the House, at least from the Green Party, to fighting back against this piece of legislation. We commit to listening to the voices of people on the benefit and bring them with us in our campaigns to change this government and have an income support that allows people to live with dignity. In fact, I would say that caregivers form a large part of who's on income support. It's a work that is actually the most underappreciated by this government, because if this government appreciated caregiving, raising children, they would not have income support for those that are raising children and are focusing on raising children as a primary task below the poverty line. This government has decided to treat caregiving obligations as not worthy of livable incomes. I want to make it to everyone out there doing their best to access income support under a government that is making it harder for them to do so, at a time where even work and income staffers are telling us that the front line is, quote, oversubscribed because of the policies that this government has introduced. When we have even the case managers telling us that they don't have the capacity to help people and continue with programs to prevent homelessness because of shameless and terrible, cruel policies that simply increase poverty, we know that something is terribly, terribly wrong. No matter how much the government members on the other side may try to spin this as a positive thing to help people get into unemployment, the facts speak for themselves. This bill will increase inequality, poverty, homelessness, and will not support people into employment. No matter what the government member says, it doesn't actually match the facts that are in all the reports, all the evidence, all the research, because they don't care. All they've cared about, as they've indicated to us, is calling beneficiaries bottom trawlers, punching down on those who need help the most, and increasing unemployment, because this isn't a government that is here to serve the many, simply to serve the wealthy few mates. We will fight for an economy that works for everyone and to repeal this terrible and shameful piece of legislation as soon as we get back into power. Let's make this a one-term government.
Like that little jab there at the end. But yes, he's right. I mean, basically what this government has done is, like, they've looked at the economy. They rightfully made the judgment that the economy is getting too hot. We need to, create a bit of an artificial recession. Okay, what was not necessary for them to do was to strip away the safety net that would have caught those people and carried them through until our economy stabilized. Okay, that was a choice by this government to do that, because they wanted to give their mates tax cuts. And they wanted to give the corporation mates tax cuts. They wanted to give themselves tax cuts, and they wanted to buy a bunch of secondhand helicopters and do bills that everyone hates. So, it was a choice by them. They didn't have to strip away the safety net, just like they didn't have to, they didn't have to screw over victims of state abuse by not committing to creating a new redress scheme. This is all a choice.
Yeah. I love what not Bernadette has, Citizen Gold, not to accept it as a source of payment. Well, many landlords, private landlords, not property management companies, some do not want to be on the WINS payment redirection system because they find the process too burdensome, or there could be various random little reasons.
Just to comment on that point, that whole card system is going to screw over private landlords as well, because a good portion of the income that people are receiving, like 50% of that is on a fucking card, right? 52% of your money already goes towards rent, okay? So that could potentially put people into arrears.
Yeah. And also makes things a bit messy when it comes to unpaid rents with arrears if you do part payments.
Yep.
Because WINS's systems itself don't cope with that.
No.
Yeah, they don't cope, let alone many of the systems that actually property management companies use do not cope well with part payments, because the system itself is designed on familiarity reconciliation.
Yeah, so what Louise is doing here is she's effectively screwing over a portion of landlords that rely on beneficiaries for rent. And if those beneficiaries can't meet their obligations because, I don't know, they've got a broken down car or they don't have access to public transport, the landlord's going to be fucking screwed as well.
Where they do everything right, and the case manager mistakes, what do you call it, Jonathan for Johnny, and sanctions Johnny instead of Jonathan, when Johnny is doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that with someone who has a common name as Sam, or, that sometimes ends up creating problems that, with common names. And say you've got seminars with multiple people with the same first name that go there, and say not all the Sams turn up. Well, you do run the chance of the wrong Sam being sanctioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. you.